Welcome back to the Simulator series. In today's episode, we are going to be creating the boost system. Now, hopping directly into Studio, the first thing we'll do is start creating the GUI. So we're going to go inside of the Star GUI, and we are going to look for a shop screen GUI and make sure that we have this enabled so that we can see it. Now that we have that enabled, we're going to go inside of the frame, and then we're going to go ahead and duplicate the clicks frame. We'll go ahead and rename the new one to be called boosts, and then we're going to want to set this to be visible. Awesome. Now that we can actually see it, let's go ahead and go inside of it. And the first thing that we're going to do is change the background color of this. What I like to do is set the background color to usually something similar to the bun background color. So we're going to go ahead and grab that color. Now that we've done that, let's go to the title and update the text of this. This should just say boosts, and then we'll update the subtitle as well, which is going to say stacks with game passes. Now that we've done that, the next thing that we need to do is update the container, but instead of just simply updating this container frame, we actually have to add a brand new instance inside of here because we don't want to use a simple frame. We actually want to use a scrolling frame. So we're going to go ahead and add a scrolling frame inside of here, and we're going to rename this to be called container. Now for the size and position properties, we are going to copy all of those from the original container onto the new one that we just created. So let's go ahead and grab its size, and then we'll also grab its position as well as its anchor point and set all of those properties onto here as well. Now that we've done that, let's go ahead and actually set the background color of this. And what we're going to do is grab this background right here that we're already using, and then we're just going to make the color slightly darker. Cool. And I think that looks pretty good. The next thing we'll do with this container is we'll adjust its scroll bar thickness. I'm going to set this to something like 8 so that it's a little bit smaller. We're also going to want to modify the automatic canvas size as well, and we're going to set this to Y. And then for the canvas size on the Y scale, we're going to set this to 1. Going down just a little bit further, we're also going to set the vertical scroll bar inset to be always. And now that's pretty much all that we have to do for the scrolling frame. Next, what we're going to do is go inside of the original container frame and grab both the template and the UI grid layout and put that inside of our new container. Now that we've done that and this frame is empty, we can go ahead and delete the original container frame. Then let's go ahead and select the template and make it visible so that we can actually see it. And now we can start playing around a little bit with the UI grid layout. Now the first thing we want to do is set the vertical alignment to top. And now we can start playing around with the cell size. Now we're going to set the cell size on the X to about 0.975 because we want it to be almost the entire width of the container. And then for the height, we're going to go with about 0.35. And now that we've done that, let's also go ahead and add a UI padding to this as well, because I don't like how the template is touching the very top of the container. I want there to be a tiny bit of spacing between the two, so we're going to use UI padding for that. Now we're going to go ahead and set the scale of the padding top to be 0.015, and now that gives us just a tiny bit of padding towards the top. Now that I think about it, there's actually probably no reason to bring along this text bun template, so we can just go ahead and simply delete it. Now that we've deleted it, let's go ahead and add a frame inside of here, and we're going to rename this to be called template. And now that we've done that, let's go ahead and update its background color. We're going to go ahead and select our darker background color, and then just make this one even darker. Now the next thing we're going to do is add another frame inside of here, and we're going to call this icon. Now of course we want to make sure that we set the size to scale, and then what we're actually going to do with this frame is we basically want to create a little image on the left side of our template, which is going to contain an icon of what boost the player can actually purchase. So I'm going to scale this up a little bit, and then I might make it a little bit skinnier, so something like that, and then we might want to move it to the left a little bit, and I think that looks pretty good. The next thing that we want to do is reposition it just a tiny bit because we do want to make sure that we have it centered vertically perfectly. So we're going to go ahead and set the anchor points Y to 0.5 as well as the positions Y scale to 0.5. And now that we've done that, I'm going to go ahead and actually make the background transparency just a little bit lighter, so probably something like 0.8 or maybe even 0.9. This icon frame is really only going to be used as a background for the icon image label that we're actually going to create. So depending on what color you want or anything like that, you of course can make your own changes to this as you feel like. Anyways, next what we're going to do is throw an image label inside of here. We're going to rename this to be called icon as well. For the background transparency, we're going to set that to 1. For the actual image of this, I'm just going to use the clicker button icon for right now. Of course, when it comes to images, we always want to make that scale type set to fit. And then let's go ahead and update its sizing. Now for the size of this, we're going to go with 0.9 on both the X and the Y. And then of course we want to center this as well. So let's go ahead and set that to 0.5 as well as that. Perfect. Now our icon's looking pretty good. So now that we're done with creating that icon, the next thing that we want to do is start to add some text labels to here. So what I'm going to do is grab the title text label, duplicate it, and put it inside of the template. Now for the text of this, it's actually going to say something like 2 times clicks or 2 times gems or whatever else you want to actually call your boosts. Anyways, now that we've updated the text of this, let's go ahead and resize and reposition this. Now, where do we want this positioned? Well, we almost want it to be touching the icon image label, but we want to move it just a tiny bit from actually touching it. And then we don't want it to be this tall, so we're going to make it just a little bit smaller. And I think that's actually pretty decent sizing right there. But we also want to make it a little bit more thin as well, so let's probably drag it to somewhere right there. And now if you're curious about what the sizing I actually went with was, this is the sizing. sizing, and then for the positioning, this is the positioning as well. We also do have the text X alignment set to left originally from how our title was set up. So if you're wondering why your text is appearing differently or why it's appearing this way, that's why, in case you might have forgot. Now that we've set up the title, let's go ahead and duplicate this, and we're going to rename this to be called subtitle. Now for the text of this, we're going to say something like get 2 times clicks. In addition to that, we're going to go ahead and update the font face style and make this not bold. Now that we've done that, we also want to readjust its sizing because we don't want it to be as tall as the title is. Of course, because this is the subtitle. So what we're going to do is set the Y scale to 0.15, and then we'll see if we need to increase the sizing from there. So now that we've adjusted its sizing, let's go ahead and move it down a tiny bit. And now I think that looks pretty good, although I do want to make the text just a tiny bit longer. And I'm going to say something like get 2 times clicks from all sources. So now the text of this text label is just a little bit longer than the original title text label, and I feel like doing that makes the subtitle look a lot better. And of course, you can make your own adjustments however you feel like. Now we need one more text label inside of here, so we're going to go ahead and duplicate this, and we're going to rename this to be called time. Now for the text of this, we're going to say something like time remaining, and then :00:00:00:00. And then we're going to go back to the font face. We'll go ahead and make this bold, and then we're going to drag this down a little bit. Now, similar to how we have the title text label, we basically want to do the exact same thing, but we want this text label to align with the bottom of the icon frame. So we're going to go ahead and resize this as well. Actually, maybe even in both directions, but I also might make that a tiny bit smaller as well. So now let's make sure that it's aligned with the bottom of the frame, which it is, and I think that's looking pretty good. So if you're wondering about the sizing that I went with, we went with almost 0.5 exactly on the X scale, but you can see the sizing there. And then for the positioning, this is what we went with for that. Cool, so now that we've added all those labels, the last thing that we have to do is add all the buttons for purchasing these boosts. So what we're going to do is create a frame inside of the template, and we're going to rename this to be called buttons. Now, of course, for the size, we're going to want to make sure that that is set to scale, and then we're going to want to move this over to the right side of the GUI. Then we'll also resize it a little bit. We almost want it to be the entire height of the template, and I think that width is pretty good as well. So that's the sizing that we're going with for right now. Then let's go ahead and make sure that we center this perfectly vertically. So let's set both of those to 0.5, and there we go. Now, what I'm then going to do is set the background transparency to 0.9 so that we barely see this, but we can still see it a tiny bit so that we can make sure that all of the children inside of this frame stay within the actual bounds of the frame itself. Now, inside of this frame, we're going to go ahead and create a UI list layout, and then we'll also add a frame inside of here as well. Now we're going to go ahead and rename this frame to be called 1, and then we're going to resize it. So on the X scale, we're actually going to set that to 1 because we want it to be the entire width, and for the Y, we're going to set that to 0.31 because we want to be able to fit 3 of these inside of this frame. In addition to that, we're going to set the background transparency to 0.8 just so again, we can see the actual bounds of this frame while working on it. Now inside of this frame, we're also going to add a UI list layout here as well, and then we're going to go ahead and create a text button. Now we're going to rename this text button to be called buy, and for the size of this text button, we're going to go with 0.4 on the X scale and 0.8 on the Y scale. For the text of this, we're going to set it to blank, and for the background color, we're going to go with a green. Then inside of this button, we're going to want to add a text label to it, so let's go ahead and just duplicate the title text label, put that inside of the button, and then we're going to rename this text label to be called price. Now for the text of this, we're going to say something like 99 our money symbol, and then let's go ahead and resize it. So for the size, we're going to go with 0.85 on the X and 0.85 on the Y. We also want to make sure that we center it as well, so 0.5 for everything there. And then we also want to adjust the text X alignment to be center as well. And cool, we're done with that price text label. Another thing that we want to do is inside of this buy button, let's go ahead and throw in a UI corner inside of here. And we can go ahead and set the corner radius to something like 0.15 and see how that looks. And now it's actually a little hard to tell, so we might want to come back in the future and readjust this, but I think it's looking decent enough for right now. Anyways, going back to the 1 frame, the next thing that we want to do is add a text label inside of here, which displays the amount of time the player gets for clicking on the specific button. So let's go ahead and actually duplicate that price text label that we just created, drag that inside of the 1 frame, and now we'll rename this text label to be called time. Now for the text of this, we're going to say something like +5 min, and for the text X alignment, we actually want to make this to the right. Now along with that, we're going to resize it just a tiny bit. So for the size on the X scale, we're going to go with 0.45, and on the Y scale, we're going to go with 0.9. Now that we've done that, we can go ahead and update the UI list layout. Now, rather than the fill direction being vertical, we're actually going to set that to horizontal. For the horizontal alignment, we're going to make that center, and we'll also do the same for the vertical alignment as well. Now our sort order is currently set to the layout order, and these are being displayed in the opposite order that we actually want. So what I'm going to do is update the layout order property of the time text label, and we're going to set this from 0 to -1. So now the text label is appearing on the left, and the button is appearing on the right. After that, we might want to go back to the UI list layout, and this time we probably want to adjust the padding. Rather than the padding being 0, we're going to set it to something like 0.035. So now there's just a little bit of space between the two. And now we're pretty much done with actually creating this 1 frame, and we're going to duplicate this 2 more times for the other purchasable amounts. So we're going to go ahead and duplicate this, rename this to be called 2, and then we'll duplicate it one more time, rename this to be called 3. And also the reason that we're duplicating these and not really doing anything to them right now is also just to visually see how they appear currently. Maybe you want to go back to 1 and make some changes there. I definitely recommend you do this so that you don't have to go back to every single one that you want to make changes to and then make changes to them that way. Whereas if we get a quick preview of them, we see, oh, I want to make one change. All I have to do is go back to 1, make those changes, and then duplicate it 2 more times, rename them, and then they're all good to go. Anyways, I'm not going to want to make any more changes to them, so I'm fine doing this. But now what I'm going to do is go ahead and actually update some of the things inside of the second and third frame just so that they all display something different. So going into number 2, for the text of the time, we're actually going to say plus 15 min, and then I'm just going to change the price to something like 149 RS. Then going to number 3, for the time here, we're going to say plus 30 min. And going into the buy button, for the text of the price, we're going to say something like 199 RS. Okay, cool. And now looking at all of them, I think they all look pretty good. The next thing that we want to do is actually update the UI list layout of the buns frame now. And with this, we're going to set the horizontal alignment to center. And then we're also going to adjust the padding as well. Now for the padding of this, I just want a tiny bit of space between all of them, so I'm going to go with 0.05. And I think that looks pretty good. Another thing that you could do is you could set the vertical alignment to center as well, so that they appear perfectly centered vertically. I think the last thing that I'm going to do is go ahead and update the background transparency of all of these to 1, and then I'm also going to update the background transparency of the buns frame to 1 as well. Also, maybe one more thing, just being a little proactive, which I don't think you exactly need to do this. Considering we're using a UI list layout, we do want these to be displayed in a very specific order, and I don't think that Roblox will mess this up at all because of how we created this. But just in case it does, we might as well set the layout order here. So for 1, we're just going to leave the layout order to 0. For 2, we're going to set the layout order to 1, and then for 3, we're going to set the layout order to 2. Now the reason that we're doing this is because the UI list layout is displaying these in a very specific order based on their layout order. Now originally, when they all had a layout order of 0, the UI list layout was just taking into account when that instance was created. So considering we created 1 first, that appeared towards the top, then we created 2, that appeared second, and then since we created 3 third, that appeared all the way towards the bottom. And another thing, layout order begins at 0. This number doesn't really matter, so if I did want to, I could just have this set to 1, then I could just have this set to 2, and then I could have 3 set to 3 as well. It's not like you have to start at 0 or that number exactly matters. The number is pretty much just in comparison to the other children inside of this frame as well. So 1 gets compared to 2, 2 gets compared to 3, and so on. But anyways, with that being said, we're now done creating the buns frame. And along with being done with the buns frame, we're pretty much done creating the entire template. So let's go ahead and duplicate this a couple of times and see how it appears. And I think it looks pretty good. Of course, if you want to make any changes to this, you certainly can. But to finish this off, I'm going to delete all the other templates except for 1, and now we're good to go. So now that we've gotten the GUI created, let's get into the scripting side of things. But before we do that, we actually have to do another thing, and that is creating the developer products. Now, we're going to be creating 3 different boosts in our game, and now for each boost, we're going to create 3 developer products. Now, as we can see on screen here, we have 3 different buns. The first bun is plus 5 min, then the next one is plus 15, and then we have plus 30 min. And then the buns beside them display the price for how much that developer product would cost. So for every single boost, we're going to have 3 different durations that can be purchased to extend the player's time. Now, to begin creating these developer products, we could go to the Roblox creator website, but we can also do most of it in Studio as well. So we can go to the game settings, and then inside of here, we're going to go to the monetization tab and scroll all the way down. Now, once we're down here, we should see some of our pre-existing developer products, and then we can just go ahead and click on create. Now that we've created a new one, I'm going to go ahead, click on the 3 dots, and click on edit. Now, for the first boost that we'll set up, it's going to be 2 times clicks, and what I'm going to name this developer product is 2 times clicks, then our first time, so I'll say 5 min, and then we'll say boost. So 2 times clicks, 5 min boost. Now, the reason that we're naming it this way is so that when the player is actually prompted to purchase this item, they're given the full name, so they're given more context as to what they're actually purchasing, and they're not getting confused at all. Now that we've set the name of it, we can also set the price, so I'm going to set this to 99, and then we can go ahead and click the back arrow. The reason that we're clicking the back arrow is because now we want to click the create button once again, and then we'll click the 3 dots, we'll edit this one. Instead of saying 5-minute boost, this time we'll say 15-minute boost, and for the price of this, I'll set that to 149. We'll click the back arrow once again, then we'll create a brand new developer product, and for the last one, we have 30 minutes, so let's go ahead and edit this. So we now have 30 min, and how much are we setting that price for? We're setting it to 199, and now we're done with creating the 3 developer products for the first boost. Now I'm going to show you just the start of creating one more so that you can see exactly what we're doing once again. We're going to go ahead, click create, edit this again. I'm going to paste in our previous name, but this time we're actually going to be working with the 2 times gem boost. And then for the time, I'm going to say 10, just to make this number different than our previous boost so we can make sure that everything's looking correctly and it's also functioning correctly. And then for the price of this, I'm just going to set it to 49, give it a little bit of a different price so that we can see exactly what it'll look like. Anyways, now that we've created that, make sure that you copy that name, then click the back arrow, and I'm going to go ahead and create the rest of the developer products, and I'll see you guys once I'm done. Okay, so I created the remaining developer products. As we can see here, we've already created the 2 times clicks, then you saw me begin creating creating the 2 times gems. So we created that, set those prices for those. And then we also created 3 for the luck boost as well. So you can see the product name and the price of those. Now, once we've created all of those, we can go ahead and click on the save button. And once we do that, we can go ahead and open up the settings once again, go back to monetization. And now inside of this tab, if we scroll down a little bit so that we can see the actual developer products, now what we're going to want to do is copy the ID of every single one of these. So here's an example of the list that I created with all of my IDs as well as their names. You don't have to write out the entire name. I just used the program to kind of generate this for me, and then I had to do a little bit of manual work. But anyways, I would recommend creating a list like these. If you watch the series up to this point, you've already probably created similar lists like this in the past. You just want to make sure that you have the ID as well as knowing what that product ID actually belongs to. Anyways, now that we're done with that, we can actually begin scripting. And to begin scripting, we're going to go ahead and create the boost config. So we're going to go inside of the replicated storage, inside of the configs folder, and create a brand new module script. We'll of course rename this to be called boosts. And then for the module inside, we'll of course rename this as well. Now inside of here, we're going to go ahead and create a brand new type. So we're going to say export type. We're going to call this type boost. And now what we're going to set this to is actually a string union. And if you're unfamiliar with what a string union is, basically boost can be one of multiple different strings. So for instance, the first boost that we'll create is called 2 times clicks. Then using shift and the key right above your enter key, you can create this vertical line. And then beside that, we'll create another string. And this will be the name of our second boost, which is going to be called 2 times gems. And then for our third and final boost, we're going to call that 2 times luck. And that's all we have to do for creating this type. And if you're wondering why we created that type, it's because when we use that in functions in the future, it's going to be a lot simpler and clearer for what arguments we actually have to pass through when a function's parameter wants a boost. So it'll automatically fill that in for us, and it'll give us the option of selecting either 2 times clicks, 2 times gems, or 2 times luck. Anyways, the next thing that we're going to do is create a variable containing all of those different types of boosts as well. So the variable name is going to be called boosts, and that's going to be equal to a table. And inside of this table, we're going to add in all of our boost names. So we're going to say 2 times clicks, 2 times gems, and finally 2 times luck. Okay, now that we've done that, the next thing we're going to do is create our config variable. So we're going to say boost.config, which is going to be equal to a table. Now for the keys of this table, we're going to be using our boost names. And the value of that is going to be a table which has some information about each of the individual boosts. So we're going to go ahead and use some braces. And inside of here, we're going to create a string, which is going to be the boost name. So we'll say 2 times clicks. We'll set that equal to a table. Now the first property of this table is going to be description, which is going to be equal to a string that we're going to display in the GUI. So our description is going to say receive 2 times clicks from all sources. Then after that, we're going to add another property, which is going to be called prices, and that's going to be equal to a table. Now this table is going to be used as an array. So inside of here, we're going to create a table, and we're going to add 2 properties to this table. The first property is going to be called ID, and we're going to set this to the developer product ID of the first duration purchasable. And now that we set the ID, we're also going to set a property called duration, and we're going to set that equal to 5. Because remember, the first amount of time that a player can purchase for the 2 times clicks, we set to 5 minutes. So now we're done with that table. We can go ahead and add a comma, and then go ahead and paste this table 2 times. Now that we've done that, we're going to want to update the ID for the second amount of time that can be purchased, and then we're also going to want to update the duration as well, which we're going to set that to 15. Now for the last one, we're going to set the duration to 30, and then we're also going to update the ID as well. Okay, so now that's all that we actually have to do for each of the different boosts. So let's go ahead and actually copy and paste this and do this for both of the other boosts. So now we'll get working on 2 times gems. This time we'll just say receive 2 times gems from all sources. And although this message is pretty much the exact same, except we're just changing one word inside of it, we could have done this a different way. But the reason that I added the description property for each of the unique boosts is because I feel like you guys might want to have more customization possibly if you add in other boosts that might be unrelated to each other and it's more than just one word changing at a single time. So that's why I'm adding the description here, even though it kind of seems pointless for the boosts that we're using. Anyways, back to updating the second boost. So updating the first developer product, this ID is going to be that ID, and then the duration is going to be 10. And now I expect that you guys understand the flow of this, so I'm going to go ahead and do the rest here, and then I'll see you guys once I'm done. Okay, so now I just did it for 2 times gems, and now we're going to go with 2 times luck. We'll update the description, and then I'll update the rest of these as well. And now we fully added the luck boost to here as well. And now with adding that last boost, we're actually done with creating the config. So now we can go ahead and move on, and we're going to begin adding some functions to this. The first function that we're going to be creating inside of here is going to be called getActiveDuration, which is going to accept the boost, which is of the boost type that we created earlier. And we're also going to accept the player's data as well. Now this function is going to be super simple. All we're going to do is return the player's data. Then we're going to index the boost table, which we have not actually created yet inside of the template. So if you're confused by that, don't worry. But we're going to create a table inside of the player's data, which is going to be called boosts. And this is actually going to be a dictionary. So for the key, we're going to be using each of the boosts as a string, and then their value is going to be a number representing the duration that the player has for that boost. And if they don't have any, then it's going to be set to 0. So now, like I said, it's going to be a dictionary, and the keys are going to be specific boosts. So what are we going to do with this table? Well, we'll simply index the boost table with the specific boost, and that'll give us the value, which is going to be the duration that the player has for that specific boost. Cool. Now that we got that function out of the way, let's go ahead and make the next one. This function is going to be called getBoostFromAll. from product ID, and we're going to accept the product ID, which is going to be a number. Now what we want to do is loop through all of the boosts inside of the boost config. So we're going to say for boost, boost info in boosts.config do. And now we want to loop through everything inside of the prices tables so that we can check all three of the prices and see if that ID matches up. So we'll then say for underscore price info in boost info dot prices do. And now if the price info dot ID equals the product ID, then we know which boost this product ID belongs to. So we're going to go ahead and return that boost. And now that's all we have to do for that function. We'll go ahead and create one more function inside of here, which is going to be called get duration from product ID. This is going to accept a boost as well as the product ID, which is going to be a number. Now we're pretty much going to do the exact same thing that we do inside of here, but this time we already know the boost that we're looking for. So we don't have to loop through the boost config. Instead, we just have to loop through the prices inside of that specific boost. So we can actually literally go ahead and copy and paste this. Now we just have to update this code right here. So instead what we're going to say is boost.config, index that with the specific boost, and then index that with the prices property. So again, if the product info.id equals the product ID, then this time we'll actually return the price info.duration. And that's all that we have to do. But I think copying and pasting, we might have forgot to include one end statement. So let's go ahead and put that inside of there. And now that function is good to go. Now the last function that we're going to create is actually going to be below the get active duration. And this function is going to be called has boost, which is going to accept a specific boost. And then we'll also accept the player's data as well. This function is also going to be pretty simple as well. All we're going to do is simply return the boosts, then we're going to use the get active duration function, and we'll pass through the boost that we're looking for, as well as the player's data. And to determine if the player has a boost, the active duration would be greater than the number 0. So we're going to return if that number is greater than 0. Now that we've created all those functions, let's go ahead and update the player's data. In order to do this, we're going to go inside of the replicated storage, inside of the player data folder, and open up the template. Inside of here, we want to create a variable for the boost config that we just created. And now that we've created that variable, what we're going to do is go ahead and copy these lines right here. If you guys have been following along so far, you already know that we do this pretty often. Now we're going to rename this variable to be called default boosts. It's still going to be equal to an empty table. This time though, instead of going through the shop config and going through the game passes, we're going to go ahead and use the boost config, and we're going to iterate through all the boosts. Now, of course, it's not going to be called Game Pass info. Instead, this is going to be the actual boost. And now we want to update the code inside of this for loop. So we want to update the default boost table. And inside of here, we're going to use the boost as the key. And we're going to set the value to 0 because by default, players are going to have 0 duration for all their boosts. Now that we've created that variable, let's scroll all the way down. And beneath where we added wheel spin, we're now going to go ahead and add boosts, which of course is going to be equal to default boosts. Now we can close out of both of those scripts because we're pretty much done with both of them. The next thing that we're going to do is before we script this on either the server or the client side, we're going to go ahead and add in the networking. So we're going to go inside of the replicated storage, inside of the remotes folder, and we're going to add a brand new remote event. We're going to rename this remote event to be called update boost. And now that we've created that remote event, that's all the networking that we're going to need for this. Let's then also update the client state manager. So we're going to go inside of the client folder, open up the state module script, and inside of here, we're going to go all the way towards the very bottom. Then we can go ahead and copy and paste one of the last remotes that we've used. Instead of using the update wheel spin, we're going to use the update boost remote event. And what are the two arguments that this function is going to use? Well, of course, first we're going to use the actual boost, which we're just going to label as a string here. And then we'll also get the duration as well, which is going to be a number. Now, of the player data table, we want to go ahead and access that boost table. And now we're going to index this table with the actual boost. And then we're going to set the value of that specific boost to the brand new duration. And now that we've done that, we're all good with the player state manager. Now, we can first begin scripting this on the client side. So what we're going to do is go inside of the start player, inside of the start player scripts, inside of the GUI folder, inside of the shop folder, and open up the shop local script. Inside of here, we're of course going to want to create a variable for the boost config. Along with creating that variable, we also want to create a variable for the boost frame. And that's of course equal to frame.boosts. We'll also create a variable for the boost container, which of course is inside of the boost frame. And now that we've done that, we're going to go ahead and start off by creating a brand new function. This function is going to be called generate boosts, and it's not going to have any parameters. Now, the logic of this function is going to be pretty similar to how we generate game passes and even pet packages. So what we're going to do is iterate through the boost config. So we're going to say for boost, boost info in boost config.config do. And now each time we iterate through them, we want to go ahead and clone the template and start creating that frame for each individual boost. So we're going to go ahead and create a variable called clone, which is going to be equal to the boost container.template. And then we're going to clone that. Now, of course, we're going to go ahead and parent that to the boost container. Along with that, we want to make sure that we set the visibility of it equal to true. We're then going to want to go ahead and get the active duration of the boost, which we'll use the boost config, and we'll use that get active duration function that we created. Now, for the boost, we're going to go ahead and, of course, pass through the actual boost. And then for the player's data, we're going to go ahead and pass through the state manager.getData. We'll then go ahead and set the name of the clone equal to the boost as well. Then inside of the clone, we have that title text label, and we're going to set the text of that equal to the boost as well. Now, we also have that time text label inside of here, and we're going to update the text of that as well. And what we're going to set that to is time remaining. We'll then use a colon. And then inside of here, we're going to use the format time library. We'll use the convert to HMS function, and then we'll pass through the active duration. We'll then also update the subtitle text label, which we're going to set equal to the boost info dot description. Now we still need to set the icon, and we also have to set up all the buns for this as well. There's two different ways that we could set up the icon image label, but the first way that we're going to do this is by creating a variable here called image, and we're not going to set that equal to any value. Now, before we set the image, what we're actually going to begin doing is setting up all the buns. So we're going to say for index price info in boost info, and now we want to iterate through that prices table. So since we get the index here and the price info, what we want to do is get that frame from the buns, which is named the same as the index. So we're going to create a variable called price frame, which is going to be equal to the clone.buns, and then we're going to index that with the specific index of the price that we're going through now. Now that we have that frame, the next thing we're going to do is create a variable called product info, which we're going to use the marketplace service to get, and we'll go ahead and use the get product info method. For the asset ID, we're going to pass through the price info.id, and then for the info type, we're going to pass through the enum.infotype.product because we want to get a developer product. Now that we have the product info, let's go ahead and create a variable for its price. So product info.price in Robux. And now we can also set the image as well. So we're going to set the image variable equal to the product info icon image asset ID. Now, how we're setting the image here is we're actually using the icon image of the developer product. So if you did not set an image for that developer product, then this image is not going to work for you. An alternative method for setting the image would actually be adding another property to boost info called image, and then you could simply set the image for each of the individual boosts there as well. Now, with the method using the developer product, the reason that I went with this method is because that allows us to only set the image in one location rather than also having to set it in the config as well, when we could just do it this way instead. Now, inside of the price frame, we also have a time text label, so we're going to set the text of that. And what we're going to set the text of that equal to is plus, and then we want to get the price info, and inside of here, we want to get the duration property, and then right after that, we're going to say min. In addition to that, inside of the price frame, we also have that by text button, and we're going to update that price text label that's inside of it. Now, what are we going to set this to? Well, we're going to use format number dot format compact on the price, and then we can use our money symbol right after that to indicate that it costs Robux. Now that we've updated displaying how much it costs, we also need to write the logic for when the player clicks the button, and then we want to prompt them to purchase that. So we're going to say price frame dot buy dot mouse button one click connect. Inside of here, we'll of course create an anonymous function. Then we'll use the marketplace service. We'll then use the prompt product purchase method. We'll pass through the player, as well as the price info.id, which is the developer product ID. And that's all that we have to do. Now, after that loop is done, we still need to actually set the image of that icon. So what we're going to do is say clone.icon.icon.image, and then we're going to set that equal to the image variable. Okay, cool. So now we're generating the boost and everything that goes along with that. Now, where can we actually use this function? Well, let's go all the way down to the bottom of our script, and right above where we use the set mode function, let's go ahead and call the generate boost function. Now let's go back to the top of the script and create one more function, which is going to be called update boosts. Inside of here, we're actually going to use a while true do loop. And with this loop, we want to update all of those boosts that we've generated with the duration for how much time the player has left of that boost. So of course, we're going to update this every second. So let's go ahead and use a task.wait1 all the way at the bottom of our for loop. Then what we're going to do is loop through all of the boosts inside of our boosts array. So we're going to say for_boost in boosts.boosts do. Then we're going to go ahead and get that clone that we created earlier. So we're going to say boost container, find first child, and then we're going to pass through the boost name. And now if we are able to find that child, which we should always be able to, but just in case we're not able to, let's go ahead and put that inside of an if statement. Now, if we are able to find it, what we're going to do is update the time text label. So let's go ahead and get its active duration. And how do we get its active duration? Well, we can use the boost config, and we'll use the get active duration function that we created. We'll pass through the boost, and then we'll also pass through the state manager.getData. Now that we've done that, we can go ahead and inside of the clone, we have that time text label. Let's go ahead and update the text of this. And what are we going to set it to? Well, we're actually going to set it to the same string that we made down here. So we could literally just copy and paste it just like that. Okay, cool. And that's all that we have to do inside of here. So every single second, this is going to loop through all those boosts that we're displaying on the GUI, and it's going to update the time with the amount of time that's remaining for that specific boost. Now, where are we going to call this function? Well, once again, let's go all the way down towards the bottom of the script. Right underneath where we actually use task.spawn on update spin time, we're going to kind of do the same thing here. We're going to say task.spawn, and then we're going to call the update boost function. And there we go. That's actually all that we have to do on the server side. So we can go ahead and save this and close that script. Now that we're done scripting this on the client side, let's go ahead and script this on the server side. So we're going to go inside of the server script service, and we're going to open up the shop script. Now inside of here, we're going to create a variable for the boost config. And now that we've done that, we're also going to go ahead and create a function inside of here called reward boosts. This is actually just going to accept the player's profile along with the product ID, which is going to be a number. Now, we're going to create a variable in here called boost, and we're going to use a function inside of the boost config to get the specific boost from the product ID. So we're going to say boost config.get boost from product ID, and then we're going to go ahead and pass through the product ID. Now, if we're not able to find any boost, then we're just going to stop the function right there. Then we'll create a variable for the duration that this boost gives off. So we're going to say local duration equals boost config.get duration from product ID. We'll then pass through the boost as well as the product ID. And now we're actually going to multiply this number by 60. Now, the reason that we're multiplying this number by 60 is because the duration that we set inside of that config is in minutes. So on the front end, where the player sees that number displayed, we don't need to divide that number by 60 because we're already using minutes there. So now, since we did it that way, we now need to do the math on the server side where we actually need to convert this into seconds because that's how we're going to use it on the back end. So now that we're getting the duration in seconds, what we're then going to do is create a variable called active duration, which is going to be equal to the boost config.get active duration. And then we want to get the active duration of this boost of the player. So we're going to pass through the boost as well as the player's profile.data. And now once we know how long the player currently has of this boost, and we also know the duration that we need to add to it, we'll then create a variable calculating the brand new duration. So we're going to create a variable called new duration, and that's going to be equal to the duration plus active duration. Now we can go ahead and update the player state. So we're going to go inside of the profile, inside of their data table, update the boost table, and then we're going to index that boost with the specific boost, and then we're going to set that equal to the brand new duration. Now, you're probably already thinking, well, we now have to replicate this to the client, so shouldn't we use a remote event? But we're not actually going to do that here. We'll do that separately, and you'll see why in just a second. The last thing that we have to do inside of this function, though, is we actually have to return if the purchase has been granted. So, of course, we're going to return enum.productPurchaseDecision.purchase granted. Cool. So now that we've created this function, let's go ahead and use it. And where are we going to use it? Well, we're going to actually use it inside of the purchase product function. And we're going to say else, because if the product type is not clicks, pets, or spins, then it's definitely going to be boosts. And then what we're going to do is go ahead and return the reward boost function. And of course, we'll pass through the profile as well as the product ID. Cool. So now we set up whenever the player actually purchases his product. But the next thing that we have to do is set up the logic for decreasing the player's time of their specific boosts. So what we're going to do is go all the way towards the top of the script, and we're going to create a brand new function, which is going to be called boosts loop. And this is not going to have any parameters. Now again, inside of here, we're going to be using a while true do loop. Towards the bottom of this, we're going to say task.wait1 because we want this loop to run every second. Then what we're going to do is loop through all the players that are currently in our game. So for underscore player in players, get players, do. Then we'll go ahead and get the profile of that player. So inside of player data, we have the profiles table. We'll index that with the player. Now, if we're not able to get the profile, then we're going to return end and stop the function right there. Then we're going to go ahead and get the player's boost table. That's of course equal to profile.data.boosts. Then we want to loop through all the boosts inside of that table. So we're going to say for boost, comma, time in boosts do. And now, as we iterate through each of the boosts, what we want to do is we want to check if the time is greater than 0, because that means that the boost is active. Now, if the boost is active, then we want to subtract 1 second from each of the boosts as well. So we're going to say profile.data.boosts. We're going to index that with the specific boost, and then we're going to subtract that by 1. Now, in addition to that, this is where we're going to replicate that to the client. So we're going to go ahead and use that update boost remote event that we just created. We're going to go ahead and fire client. We'll pass through the player. We'll pass through the boost, and then we'll also pass through their new time as well, which is going to be the profile.data.boosts, and then we're going to index that with the specific boost. Cool. And now that's all that we have to do for that function. So when are we going to call it? Well, let's go down towards the bottom of the script, and inside of here, we're going to use task.spawn, and then we're going to go ahead and call the boost loop function. Now, one mistake that I actually made here, if we go back to the boost loop function, inside of our while loop, if we don't find a profile, then we return end and stop the function right there. But the issue with this is that that stops the entire loop. So what we're going to do is we're going to say if not profile, then continue end and go ahead and check the next player. So now that we've done that, we should be able to hop into our game and test this out. Now, all of them have generated, and I did actually just test this out a second ago, so that's why we actually do have some of these boosts, but that was before I fixed the issue, so that's why I'm recording this after we fixed that issue. Anyway, we can see that everything's updating here. We don't see any icons. The reason for that is because I did not upload icons for these developer products. Of course, if you want to do that, you certainly should. Then you'll have your icons appear here. But along with that, we can go ahead and test out purchasing one of these boosts. So let's go ahead and purchase the luck boost, and we can see that when we purchase that, 5 minutes has been added to our time, and now our time is 9 minutes and 20 seconds, and the timer is continuously ticking down. We can go ahead and purchase 50 minutes as well and see how that looks, and now we see that we have 59 minutes, so that is working perfectly. So now that we're done with scripting this on the server side, we can go ahead and close that shop script, but the next thing that we need to do is actually increase the player stats based on if they have these boosts or not. So in order to do that, we're going to go inside of the replicated storage, and we want to go to the utils folder, and inside of here, we want to open up the stats module script. Now, implementing these are quite simple, but the first thing that we're actually going to do is fix the misspelling of multiplier here. So let's go ahead and update this word. Instead of saying multiplier, we're actually going to rename this to be called multiplier. And we also needed to fix that inside of the gem multiplier function as well, so I updated that there too. And now we also need to get the boost config as well. So let's go ahead and create a variable for that. And now that we have that variable created, let's go ahead and start implementing the click multiplier boost. So underneath where we check if the player owns the game pass, we're going to create a brand new variable, which is going to be called has boost. And we're going to use the boost config, and then we'll use the get active duration function. The boost that we want to check if it's active or not is 2 times clicks. And then of course we'll pass through the player's data. Now, if the player does have that boost, then what do we want to do? Well, we'll of course increase that multiplier by 1. Now, we can pretty much just go ahead and copy and paste this logic into the gem multiplier as well. Now, of course, instead of checking for 2 times clicks, we're going to check for 2 times gems. We'll still pass through the player's data, and then we're still going to add 1 to that multiplier as well. Then finally, let's go down to the luck multiplier. We'll add that function down here as well. This time we want to look for 2 times luck, just like that. Wait, oh my god, did I just spell multiplier wrong again when oh my gosh, that is insane. Okay, let me correct that word again real fast. So there we go. Anyways, going back to the luck multiplier, what we're going to do here is look for the 2 times luck boost, and if the player does have it, then we're going to increase their multiplier by 1. Now, realistically, I don't think you want to increase it by 1 because that's probably a lot. You might want to increase it by like 0.5, but of course you can balance this to your own game. So I'm just going to leave it at 1 just to show you how to actually implement this. Anyways, we can go ahead and test this out by rebirthing. So normally we're supposed to get 10 gems, but since I do have the game pass and I also have the boost, I think we should be getting about 30. So let's go ahead and rebirth 1 time. So currently we have 950 gems. Let's go ahead and rebirth 1 time, and now we get 980. So we can see that we implemented the boost logic perfectly there. Now, we actually need to do one more thing inside of here, which I almost completely forgot about. If you go to the set mode function, I actually completely forgot to add the frame we created today to here. So in order to do this, we're simply going to go ahead and copy that spins line. And then of course, we're just going to change this from the spins frame to the boost frame. And then we're going to make this visible depending on if the mode actually equals boosts instead of spins. And now that we've done that, we also need to hide the GUI as well as hiding the template inside of here as well. So we'll go inside of the shop GUI, inside of the frame, inside of the boost frame, inside of the container, and inside of here, we have the template frame. Let's go ahead and make sure that that's no longer visible. And then let's also make the boost frame no longer visible as well. And then we'll also make the shop GUI not be enabled as well. And now that we've cleaned that GUI up, that's actually all that we had to do. And now we're completely finished with implementing the entire boost system.